Welcome to Lessons That Last, where a researcher and a teacher talk about what it means to make a lasting impact on students' lives. They unpack the stories former students shared about their memorable teachers and discuss how we can all make a greater impact on the people in our lives. Here's Julie and Laura.
Hello, and welcome back to the Lessons That Last podcast. I'm Julie Hassan, professor, researcher, and big fan of educators everywhere. And with me is my somewhat tired, but still charismatic co-host.
Hi, I'm Laura Estes-Swilly, teacher, writer, and I'm feeling very inspired by what the evidence I've seen of some really excellent teaching over the last week.
So, tired but inspired. Tell the listeners why.
So I had the opportunity to score for College Board the AP Literature exam essays. There are 3 essays, and I spent 7 days scoring question 3, which is an open question where students can choose whatever text they want to write about. And I scored hundreds and hundreds of essays, 7 days in a row. And I was just so inspired by how sharp these kids were, how insightful they were, how they really had something to say. Some of them politically, some of them about just the state of the world or the state of their own small society and their community. And I saw so much evidence of really strong teaching, not just like the nuts and bolts of teaching, the composition and, how to put your argument together, but the type of teaching that allows students to think and to bring in their own ideas instead of like that restrictive teaching sometimes we see. And so I just felt so inspired finishing it. So good.
You got to see evidence of some critical thinking.
Yes, so much critical thinking. I saw evidence of wide readership. There's a book that I tried to read and I couldn't read because it was just too upsetting for me, which is unusual. I read everything. It's a book called Johnny Got His Gun. And I got to a certain point and I had to put it down. And I had one essay on that text. Mm-hmm. And I said to myself, somebody read this because he wanted to. Nobody's teaching this text. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but I just can't imagine the school that would be like, yeah, teach that, because it's really, really upsetting. That's a kid who reads outside of the classroom. And I saw a lot of evidence of that as well. So that was so encouraging.
Love that kids are thinking about things beyond their own little world and wanting to experience that in all kinds of ways, but through reading especially. I mean, it gives you a little bit of faith.
It does.
That our young people are preparing for the kind of world they want to live in.
Yes. And I saw a lot of evidence of that, of what they want in the world, of the general acceptance that they want to see for everyone, not just for themselves, but for all people, all types of people from everywhere. There was just so much openness. And I know we gave 360,000 exams, and I didn't read every exam essay, but I read a good sprinkling of them, and it's random. So I was getting who I got, and I saw so much evidence of that it made me feel really, really encouraged.
So in research, we would call that a sample.
I did have a sample.
Randomized sample is really good. And if you have a big enough size, you can make some sort of at least preliminary conclusions. And it's great that you read enough papers that you said kids are reading widely, they're thinking critically, they're taking a stand and deciding what they think about things. And I think that definitely gives me hope.
Yes. And I mean, take heart, all educators, because everyone is concerned right now. We've got the post-COVID kids coming back into schools and we see what that time did to students and studentship. We've got the AI chat GPT stuff going on everywhere, and the obsession with the 90 seconds or the 3 minutes on TikTok. So take heart. There's more going on out there. They care about some things. They have something to say, and we don't always get to know that, but I got to see it.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah,
And
so good.
that is not modeled well for them by the grown-ups in their country right now,
True.
who are, many of them, firmly in a camp and have tied up their identity in a set of beliefs and don't want to hear anything that makes them uncomfortable.
Yes, and their grown-ups are stuck right here on the phone.
Yeah.
That is preloaded with the things they want to hear.
Mm. We picked today's story because it's about getting outside of your usual space and your comfort zone and taking a look at just other things and considering other perspectives and trying to have a broader sense of the world. So before we dig into that beautiful story, I'm going to ask you, do you remember a time when you had to go sort of outside of your comfort zone, like outside of the spaces you usually travel in?
I think that my entire life has been stepping out of my comfort zone or going into new spaces. But most recently, so not this past school year, but the year before, I was on a leadership team in my school for professional development and community. And we were doing a set of PD. There was a 3-part series, and we wanted someone from each department to train their department. And it just so happened there were multiple English teachers on this committee. And the one math teacher was like, yeah, I'm not doing that. And I was like, I didn't know that was an option.
Come on, math.
I said, okay, I'll do it. I'll do math. Talk about stepping out of a comfort zone. I was literally nervous preparing to present PD to the math department, half of whom I've known for years, but so far out of my range because I don't do math. I don't know a lot of math. I know nothing about teaching math. So how am I going to make this PD on basically reading strategies? How am I going to make that relevant to the math department? And so that was a big, giant step for me out of my box.
Don't you think sometimes, my husband Brian and I talked about this the other day, the things that feel less familiar or that we're less strong and comfortable in, we prepare so much that we tend to teach better.
I walked away from that PD with people thanking me, like shiny, open faces, appreciating the effort that I brought to what we were doing together. They could see it. They could see that I had to do more, that I did do more, and that I made the effort to understand what they were doing. And I think this might be part of that. I listened to what they had to say. Whereas if I was talking to a bunch of English teachers, I already know what they have to say. They're not even going to bother to say it, right? They're just like, okay, yeah.
All the unsaid stuff that we all know, common knowledge, right?
Yeah. But with the math department, they had to tell me. And I was genuinely listening, hearing things for the first time. And so it became this really great synergy that we had together for that year because they were feeling heard and I was learning and preparing for what I was bringing to them next. So it was a really, really profitable step out of my boundaries.
How fun would it be if, I'm thinking especially of secondary, if we all had to like go and teach a lesson in a colleague's content area?
Yes. Yes.
Like if we all traded places for a day, you would really learn to appreciate what other people do.
That is a great idea.
I mean, it's so easy to think you have it harder than everybody else, isn't it? Like,
Yes.
I have to grade all these papers, right? Which is a legit thing for literature and English teachers, or, you know, whatever it is that you do. If you're physical education, you know, there's a whole different set of challenges, but it's easy to think that your thing is so much harder, and then you find out we all have our own challenges, and maybe we're more alike than we think.
Yes. And I don't know about in primary, but in secondary and probably also in higher ed, we also tend to think what we're doing is more important. So not just of harder work, but more important.
Clearly, I mean, if kids can't read, they can't do math anyway.
Well, yeah. And you know what? I didn't know about the link between math and reading until I spent time in the math department. And so what a broad view we would get if we were able to do that experiment.
Right.
I love that.
And we know in elementary, you know, when they're tested on science, it's so tied to their ability to read in a content area. So our subjects are more connected than we think. I remember leaving my teaching position and becoming an administrator and suddenly being in everyone's classroom and trying to understand everyone's role and having this whole different perspective and appreciation for the different challenges everybody had. Because we do think wherever we are is unique and harder and more important. You're right. And suddenly when you get a different perspective, you realize that the success of this school depends on all of us and all of our parts and all of our roles. Yeah.
Yes. I love that idea. I think I'm gonna jot that down, Julie.
I think anytime we see someone else doing something related to what we're doing, for me, you know, that was a perspective change, leaving a classroom and getting a school-wide perspective. And now I go to all different schools and districts to do training and coaching. And that's been like a real perspective broadening thing to see different context. I went last year at the beginning of the year to do an opening keynote in Weldon City, North Carolina, which is Northeast coast. And they are this small rural town that started as a plantation before the Civil War. So they are a town of mostly people of color, and they've experienced some real economic instability. And they've had a hard time hiring and keeping teachers because of their remote location and just because of, you know, it's hard to attract young people to that particular town. But when I drove up, it was off Highway 301, and it was dotted by farms. And I thought, I know this.
Yeah, you grew up here.
I know. So the first thing I said to them, you know, here comes this white professor, right? Mm-hmm. I said, I too come from Highway 301 and dotted by farms. Mine are strawberry farms, yours are cotton, right? But there was so much about that town that I recognized. And I remember thinking, all of us, like, there's so many differences, but there are also so many commonalities. Mm-hmm. In so many ways. Even though our experiences are different or our challenges are different, you learn in many ways we're all the same, right?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And that perspective shift of movement, stepping out of your comfort zone, really helps bring that home.
Yeah, I wrote about it in Pause, Ponder, and Persist, which came out this week.
Yay!
About traveling to a town kind of like that. It wasn't Weldon City, but it was a similar place, and how friendly and sweet the people were, and going to the convenience store and getting a cold Diet Coke and some peanuts and feeling like home, you know? So it's fun to think, you know, I'm going to go out of my comfort zone and explore the differences, but what I might find is we're more alike than unalike.
Right.
Yeah.
I wonder, while we were talking about like trading views within the school, what you think about the value of leadership going back into the classroom.
I think it's the best thing ever. I said to my teachers as an administrator, as an assistant principal and a principal, I was a big proponent of peer coaching. So you experienced math teacher and either your peer or a novice math teacher go in and observe each other's lessons. I will cover your class.
Mm-hmm.
If you lesson plan, I will teach. And I taught everything. And I walked into a 5th grade class. It was Carol Salvog, who was an amazing language arts teacher. She had this small group of boys, and I think I was going in for tutoring. I was covering her tutoring group. And one of them was a little concerned to see me. And he said, Terrell, he said, Dr. Hassan, like, do you know how to do this? And I said, listen, Terrell, like, Miss Salvog left me a lesson plan, and like, I think I'm qualified. The state says I'm qualified. I can do this. And then he comes up later and he's like, Dr. Hassan, but like, did you go to college?
That's so cute.
And I said, yes, I did. In fact, I went to college for a long time. And then he came back later. He's like, yeah, Dr. Hassan, but like, did you finish?
He was suspicious of you.
Tells you right there, their feeling of competence and confidence is tied up in whether or not we're competent to teach them. And
That's a good point.
So I like stopped and reassured them all that I was competent to teach them. And Mrs. Salvog was a very competent lesson plan writer. So we were good. But it was just, it was the sweetest, most humbling, best thing ever. Yeah, but like, did you finish? So, you know, and I had a connection with kids that I wouldn't have had if I had not gone and covered those classes.
Yes.
And done that teaching. And I think my teachers had a respect they wouldn't have had I not had a willingness to do that. Absolutely. I think we need to roll up our sleeves and get alongside every role we lead and figure out what the challenges are in that role and show support and ask what people need.
I love that. I love you as a leader, and I think you're a great role model. I think about walking out of the role of a school leader or a district leader and stepping into a classroom. And even though it's a smaller picture, it's a whole different view of what's happening in that school. And it must expand your understanding. It seems like it could only be positive.
And post-COVID, you know, I left my K-12 setting before COVID, a few years before. Mm-hmm. So post-COVID, I had to make sure I got back out in schools because I had no idea what that was really like unless I got back out in the schools and talked to teachers and talked to principals and kind of tried to figure out what are the challenges now and are they different, because they are. Post-COVID is very different in terms of teaching and leading. And if you're not out there, you don't know.
Right.
And there's no way you can write about it, teach about it, talk about it unless you're in it.
Role model status.
Wow. And plus just like super nosy. Like I need to know. Right. And we talked about this story before we started, and it's about getting out of your comfort zone. And for me, as a really anxious introvert, the only thing that makes me get out of my comfort zone, because I would love to just like stay in my little office and read and write, I think that's easy for me, is curiosity. And if I'm just a little more curious than I am scared, I'll go and try to figure stuff out. And I think that's a good thing for all of us, just driven by a little bit of curiosity. And the best question we can ever ask is, what is it like to be you?
Yes. Yes.
And that's sort of what this teacher did for this woman who shared this story. Yeah. So this is Callie's story about Mrs. Rosen, who was her yearbook sponsor. And she has this sweet, lasting memory about what she learned being on the yearbook staff. So, Laura, will you share Callie's story with us?
Absolutely. Mrs. Rosen was my math teacher and yearbook sponsor. She had a way of making everyone feel valued and important. I remember her commitment to making sure every student was represented in the yearbook, not just the popular kids. She frequently sent me to places in the school I never even knew existed to take pictures and gather quotes. I went way out to the barn in the agriculture department to see the new calf. I went to a room in the basement where students were preparing for a Dungeons and Dragons tournament. Those turned out to be some of my favorite layouts in the yearbook. While working on the yearbook, I realized how much of the school I had missed by staying in my own bubble. Mrs. Rosen taught me that everyone has a story worth telling. She taught me that all stories are equally worthy of being told. I'm so grateful for the way she shaped my perspective of our school and the world.
Oh, Mrs. Rosen.
She was so smart, so smart.
She said, get out of that bubble, Callie.
Mm-hmm.
See the world.
Yep. And Callie was open to it, accepted it, and then also held on to that lesson. It sounds like as a life perspective. And I love that echo of Mrs. Rosen and Callie's life.
And what a lesson. Everyone has a story worth telling.
Mm-hmm.
That's beautiful.
It is.
And deep and human, and the place from which all empathy grows, right?
Yeah, you're right.
And respect for just the humanity of everybody. If you say, like, these Dungeon and Dragons nerds are just as valuable as the football team,
Mm-hmm.
and their stories probably just as interesting. That's a powerful lesson.
It is a powerful lesson. And I think that there was some teaching going on behind all of that about how to reach people to get their stories. Because people aren't just like, oh, have a seat, let me tell you my story. Right? You have to know how to talk to people and get to know people and ask the right questions and show them you're interested for the right reasons. And then they will open to you. And so all of that was the backdrop of Callie's story that she didn't even include. That was super important.
Yes, that this is not a transactional thing.
Right.
I need you to tell me your story so I can put it in the yearbook and satisfy Miss Rosen and get my A.
Right. Exactly.
Hey, my teacher said there's a story here, and I'm here to find out about it and tell it.
And I want to comment about how hard that is to teach.
Mm-hmm.
I know only because this year I had an unusual experience. Our journalism teacher, who is responsible for the yearbook, she also teaches the journalism students who want to be in yearbook, right? She said, I'm going to do this really cool thing where we do a press conference, and here's your role, and you're this I was kind of like a nutty teacher who started a fire in the school, and I had a whole
so far off your.
I was like, I get to use my acting here, and so and then there was a guidance counselor, and there was so there was a panel of us, and the guidance counselor was playing the security guard, and he was not happy with me, so. She said, as we were getting started, only answer what they ask you. And I was like, oh, that's what we're studying here.
Okay.
Is how to get more, how to ask the right question. Yep. How to follow up.
As a researcher, I love that.
Yep.
And your data is only as good as the questions that you ask.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. And I watched how it transpired in the room, where some of them they got a yes or no from me, and they took it. And while they were taking that, someone in the other side of the room was like, wait. I have a follow-up to that, because they wanted more information. So that is a task to teach teenagers how to do that. So kudos to Mrs. Rosen.
That is such a great, because you could teach that lesson in a really dry way. ask an open-ended, these are open-ended questions. These are
Right.
closed questions. But she gave them a really immersive experience.
Yeah.
Yes.
It was great. It
That's
was
a
great.
great lesson. And it's so similar to what I teach my students who are teachers preparing to be principals, because in school we think of data as student achievement scores, right? But if you want to make really good decisions as a school leader, that's one tiny slice of
Right.
data. And you have to be a good observer, and you have to ask really good questions, and you have to collect data in all kinds of different ways. Like the best place to collect school culture data is standing in the lunchroom.
Mhm. Yes. Or in our case, the courtyard. Everything
Right.
filters through those two places.
And if you're a good observer and you ask good questions and people trust you enough to answer honestly, you can learn all kinds of things about school culture that you can never get from a survey that you constructed with some forced choice answers. So I love that lesson. And I love this lesson. Go down to the ag barn, see what's happening down there.
Try something new, find out what you never knew existed. When I first read this story, I thought about the experience of high school and what was happening in our high school that I didn't ever know about. I feel like there couldn't possibly have been anything I didn't know, but that's just me. Am I like, but there must have been a lot, right? That we just missed.
I mean, did you never go to the ag barn?
Not in high school. I went to the ag barn at my school.
But you didn't go at Armwood to the ag barn?
No. Okay, there you go. Something I meant. Why would I have gone to the ag barn?
Well, there were some cute boys in FFA.
Well,
which for you was
that would have been a draw.
Motivation.
True. I made up for not going to the ag barn in high school by going to the pig barn at my school.
Okay.
I went all the way out to the pig barn.
A second chance.
I did.
A little redemption for you.
But not everybody gets that. And so we need a Mrs. Rosen to sort of push us into new experience.
And when we were in high school, I'm thinking like Dungeons and Dragons was like there was something like that, like just emerging, where they would play this sort of fantasy game. I can think of the boys in some of my AP classes or dual enrollment classes who, and they were all genders, but it was in this particular time, mostly males. They were super smart. And I remember hearing them talk about it, but I don't think I ever really asked a lot of questions about it or tried to understand it.
Yeah. There's another thing I missed. Who knew? I thought I was in all the corners, but I was not.
You did not have your finger on the pulse of everything.
Not on all the parts.
All right, most things.
Many things. I'll admit to many things, but this is a perspective shift, I think, for anyone who reads this story. What did I miss? And if I missed that, and I thought I was involved in everything, but I missed something, what am I missing now? Like, you have to ask yourself that question. By living my life in my path,
in my bubble,
what am I missing?
What really interesting stories are in my school or in my community that I'm not even aware of?
Right.
Oh, that's great.
That's the resonation for us with this story. What am I missing? And how am I going to find it?
We have, we live by a river. We live by the Watauga River.
Love the river.
And down the street, we have this gorgeous community park, and the river runs through it. And one day we went to the nature class, which is for kids. But the big kid in my class really wanted to go because they were showing you all the different living things in the river.
Oh, yeah.
And started turning over rocks. And there are salamanders and millipedes and just all these things living in the river that you don't see from the surface. And I don't look at the river the same way anymore.
Oh,
And I'm
that's cool.
careful, like I don't kick around the rocks because there's this whole world under the rock. And I mean, I lived by that river. I would not have known that all of that was going on. So I make that connection too. Like there's these whole worlds happening.
Yes.
And if you don't get out of your bubble
Mhm.
and go to the kids' nature class,
You got to investigate however you can. I have my own version of that class in Jason Swilly, who understands nature on a level I didn't know existed. So there, out of my bubble. And we'll be driving down the road and he'll be pointing things out to me, signs of what animal was here or these tracks or, oh, did you see that? Deer staring at us through the thicket. And I'm like, what? I didn't even see a thicket. And so he's taught me just by constantly pointing these things out to look for them. And now I sometimes see them. And I was so excited yesterday. I was driving and a red-tailed hawk swooped down right in front of me and then kept going. And I was like, oh, that was a nice red-tailed hawk. And then I thought, what? How did you know that was
Who is this girl?
I learned because I have had my own long-term nature class.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's great. A great model for all of us who are spouses or parents or friends with, or teachers of people who have different interests than we do, to just listen and ask some questions. You know, mine is a baseball nut and was a pitcher in college. And so we talk a lot about baseball. We watch a lot of baseball. And I just try to ask some questions. You know, why do you throw the change up here and not a fastball or whatever? And there's some really interesting explanations. Or here's my favorite question. When the coach walks out to the mound,
what is he
saying? Does he say? Like, does he really say candlesticks make a nice gift? Let's get to, like in Durham? Or like, what does he say in that moment? And, you know, I get the answer sometimes, like it depends on the pitcher and it depends on the coach's style and this context or that. But you can learn a lot just by asking questions about something people you are invested in or passionate about.
That reminds me of taking Jason to his first poetry slam. And it was a teenage poetry slam. So everyone there was under 20 and several of my students were competing. And so all of this was going on and he's never been in this environment. And we're listening to kids perform spoken word poetry. And he's leaning over to me like this. And he was like, who wrote that? Like he wants an author credit. I said, that student wrote that. He's like, what? Oh. And then a couple minutes later, well, okay, so who wrote this one? And I was like, he wrote this one. He wrote this one in my classroom. I promise you, this kid wrote this poem. And then on the way home, there were so many questions about how they're constructed and what did this mean and why did they make this choice instead of this choice? And it was like a whole new world. So I understand how he feels when I'm asking him about the deer and the river otters, which, by the way, love river otters. And I understand how Brian feels when you ask him about baseball. I once asked him to explain the infield fly rule to me. And
no one understands that, like, really.
No, well, he explained it, but he was like, I don't know if you're gonna get this. And then so I smiled and nodded. And then we moved on.
So in my dreams at that poetry reading, Jason Swilly did some spoken word country songs. I'm imagining that, like, blame it all on my roots.
Yes.
Showed up in boots.
Yeah. He could have done that. Also, any Beastie Boys or like 90s rap.
I mean, Beastie Boys are poetry.
Mm-hmm. Easily.
Anyway.
Easily.
Brass Monkey.
Yes.
Hard to beat.
Well, I'll be honest. Yesterday, I was trying to airdrop a video and what came up was someone's phone, and I said, "Who named their phone Brass Monkey?"
Was
And
it
my husband
Brian
standing
Hassan?
next to me said, "Oh, that's mine. That's me."
So maybe friends who are, if you're still listening and haven't turned us off at this point, we're going to suggest, if you don't know the Beastie Boys, that you break out of your
Yes.
comfort bubble and
Do it.
spend a little time there, and then watch the documentary about their sort of evolution of thought,
Mhm.
which is really good.
Yes.
You will like them even more because they certainly did evolve as humans and as artists. So,
And everyone does by opening their
Right.
boundaries, trying new
Yes.
things.
I think that is a perfect place to land this. So thank you, teachers, for all the ways that you help kids push past those boundaries, get out of their comfort zones, learn
Yes.
about a bigger world, and ask good questions. We hope this summer you find some opportunities to explore. This is the perfect time to learn something new. So happy summer. Thanks for listening. Have a great week, everybody.
Bye, friends. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope you will subscribe to the Lessons That Last podcast wherever you listen. Give us a rating too, which will help other listeners find us. And don't forget to visit chalkandchances.com for more stories. You can also find more information on Julie's research and books. While you're there, take the quiz to find out what kind of memorable teacher you are. I took it and was surprised by what I found. I think you'll find good food for thought. Let us know about your quiz results. We hope you will meet us here each week and bring a friend to share the conversation.